we are going to start now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me introduce. This is Maxim. Maxim is one of the core developers of testing suite on smart contracts for FANCI or any TON contracts. So basically, it was a major upgrade recently to Sandbox because we all had a experience. Probably, I mean, I had a big experience with TON contract executor, and like all of a sudden we switched to Sandbox, and it would be very cool to kind of understand a number of things. And maybe I will be also asking questions, guys, because usually guys are asking questions and I'm answering. And today, actually, I will be also the one who is asking questions. So this is very cool thing because um, myself, I'm very curious about how is it even possible? Like, what is it? Like, maybe let's start with first one. What is different from Ton Contracts Executor? Like, what is special about Sandbox? And maybe we'll get it going from there, if you don't mind, Maxim.
Sure, of course. So the main difference from TON contract executor is that Sandbox actually emulates all the phases of a transaction. So that includes, the credit phase, the storage phase, the compute phase, the action phase, and the bounce phase. So it's basically exactly the same process as it's happening in a real network, on a real TON network, in a real blockchain. Whereas TON contract executor just only processes the compute phase, just the TVM. So it's much closer to how things are really done in real networks.
And does it still? So it still, I believe, it still doesn't support the chain of transactions, right? So you still treat every transaction as a like a singular, right?
Well, we have JavaScript code, TypeScript code actually in place that makes it process a chain of transactions completely. But in and of itself, it does process transactions one by one. Yeah, it doesn't. The chain is not processed exactly the same as in a blockchain, but every single transaction in a chain is processed like in the blockchain.
Okay. So because recently we had a question from one of the guys. He kind of started to write a test for his jeton or NFT. I can't remember, and he was creating a mint comment, and then he was taking the address and he actually expected it to be there on chain. So obviously it's not working this way if you don't support the chain of transactions, right? You cannot expect like next transaction, if the transaction deploys a wallet, let's say, you wouldn't expect the wallet to be there on the next step of the testing, right?
No, now it does support the chain of transaction for a long time. It does process the whole chain. Just it process the transactions one by one, but it does process the whole chain. So if you're sending an external message to like a wallet or something else that in turn deploys two or three other things that in turn also send some messages, then all of this stuff gets processed in one call, and you don't have to make glue code for it. I think Marco's internet is lost. I'll message him real quick.
Am I back? Can you guys
Yeah.
hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I somehow fall off with the connection. So did you say it's supported now? So you can
Yeah,
test
it supports it, and it's been supported for a really long time. The chain was not supported in basically the previous version of Sandbox, that was TX-emulator, if anyone still uses or remembers that. Yes, there you had to process them manually one by one, but Sandbox processes the whole chain. Is just that I'm saying it's not like exactly processed like in the real blockchain. Yes, every transaction is processed by using that same code basically, but there's glue code in TypeScript that takes one message, takes its all outputs and processes them as transactions too, and so on and so on.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I might actually prepare like a blueprint setup, so we could maybe ask some questions like code related, but you guys can ask your questions for now while I'm preparing. Okay.
So, and does anyone have any like questions they wanted to ask maybe?
Can it be a question related to Fancy, or does it have to be related to Sandbox?
Well, I can try to answer your questions about Fancy too. Yeah, that's not a problem.
Okay. So in the tutorial, one of the tutorial, the counter tutorial, basic tutorial, uh, there is a way to set a variable inside the contract.
Mm-hmm.
It's like inside the, let me just read this, inside the load data and then the save data. And then we can create together to access this variable. And I saw in another example, one that Mark sent me, that some variables are created like at the top, even before the load data uh, function, and it's like using the global storage dot and the name of the variable. I wanted to ask what's the difference between those two way of having the variables in the contract.
So the first way that you're referring to is when the load data function returns all the values that are stored in the storage, correct?
Yeah.
Well, the difference is really just, how convenient it is. And, since global variables are available, I've basically just been using that way because it's much more convenient. Yeah, sure. When you have like 3 variables in your contract storage, then yeah, you can, return them from your load data, decompose the tensor, well, the brackets that you have to surround the variables with to actually get the values, and pass all of them to save data. But imagine when that gets up to like 10 or 20 values, and then also whenever you add a new variable, you have to update this in all places in your code. It just gets inconvenient. It may be a little bit more gas usage, although not in all cases. In some cases, globals might be less gas usage too. But it's much more convenient to just use the globals.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey guys, I
Yes.
almost. Sorry, you can go ahead, Slav.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about another library for testing smart contracts, library which is used in, as I remember, in TACT template. I don't remember. I think it's called the TON emulator. What's the difference between Sandbox and emulator?
Well, I mean, I haven't looked at TON emulator much, but they're pretty much meant for the same things, for just testing the smart contracts. Just that, Sandbox is more integrated with Blueprint, the tool to, manage your projects and create your contracts faster. And TON emulator is more integrated with TACT. Sandbox is made by me. TON emulator is made by the creator of TACT. But other than that, yeah, they're meant pretty much for roughly the same tasks, I would say.
Am I right that both of its libraries emulates the whole, all of phases of blockchain, including compute phase, storage phase, etc.?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, you're correct. They use pretty much the same core. So both Sandbox and TON emulator, well, at least the last time I looked at TON emulator, used the same, WebAssembly core to emulate the transactions. And this WebAssembly core is compiled from the same sources that TON blockchain itself is compiled from. So that's why it's exactly the same way. The transactions are processed in the exact same way that they would be in a real blockchain.
Yeah, thank you.
Guys, 1 second. I'm almost prepared. I almost prepared the local setup so we can go through it. Second.
If any of you are wondering, actually, TACT support for Blueprint is planned, and today I actually made some progress toward it. So TACT will likely appear in Blueprint soon, along with
Nice.
fancy templates.
That's nice, because I was wondering what is going to be when the TACT will come into play, but then I realized like nothing's going to change. You can still use the same Sandbox, and because you actually operate with bytecode. So maybe let me share my screen. I'm going to. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
So basically, the very essential question that I wanted to ask, but I decided to ask it like with relating to code, is the like blockchain create. I was very curious. So I'm very curious how it happens locally that you actually emulate the blockchain work, and maybe if you could maybe say a few words about how you envision it, because we're just devs, we just use this function create, but what kind of solutions stood behind it, and how do you do this like locally? How do you do this without actual like blockchain thing that actually flips on chain?
Yeah, sure. Well, so in TON blockchain, there's like a piece of code that was written basically specifically for the purpose of emulating transactions, that basically takes an incoming message, an internal or an external incoming message to a contract, that contract state, the block configuration that includes, well, the usual things like gas prices and some other stuff, but gas prices is one of the important ones. It takes those things and it processes the message in the same way using those exact same functions as are used in the TON blockchain itself, and it returns the usual return values, the out messages, the whole transaction, and so the result that we expose in the sandbox. And so this is like the executor part. It's the part that gets compiled to WebAssembly and is shipped with Sandbox. And when you call the create method, it gets instantiated. There's also like contract storage. So every contract, has some kind of state. So there's like a map from address to that contract state. So we could use it in the chain of transactions. That also gets initialized, but it's just a map, so it's easy. Like the most important part is basically that this executor gets instantiated, WebAssembly gets compiled, and
Okay, interesting. And like maybe a smaller question, like Treasury is like a wallet, right? And
yeah,
like so basically you just provide like a seed.
yeah,
This part I figured out by myself. It was interesting that first time I actually programmed with Sandbox, when it was already in production, it was in a hackathon, and I was actually it was hard for me to understand like this part with providers. So like internal, it basically just sending the internal message, right?
yes,
So but the thing with providers, it took me a bit confused, like because I like this is just options, okay. This is something I can use, but like provider, we don't pass it in there, right? So it's kind
Yes.
of passed by default. But could you please maybe describe like the cases where you would have to pass one, and maybe why we don't pass it by default?
Can you switch back to the test file?
Yeah.
Scroll a little bit above,
Hmm.
Yeah, so there's a line, blockchain.openContract, line 41.
Yeah.
Basically, that takes an instance of your contract, your class that implements contract from TON&Co, and it makes a wrapper around that using the JavaScript feature called proxy. It makes a wrapper around that passes this provider on its own whenever you call any function that starts with send or with get. The provider gets passed in automatically for you. You don't need to do that. And this provider is connected to the blockchain instance that you create. And whenever you call provider.internal or provider.external, that message gets processed by blockchain, and you get that result when the method of your contract instance returns. So that's why you don't need to pass in this provider, and that's also why this provider needs to be the first argument of every method that starts with send and with get. And that's basically the way that TON&Co requires it to do. So that's basically a concept taken from TON&Co. It also allows you to open contract. Just it does that for you to do that with APIs, like TON Center, TON API v4, TON Lite API, and so on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Interesting. So I don't know, maybe like these questions that a few questions that I had, guys. Do you also have questions? Because it's really open mic. You can maybe ask Max something about the principles of testing contracts. Why is it important? Because basically he is the guy who's making it possible even.
Also,
Max, yeah. Go ahead.
well, before anyone has any other questions, maybe to inspire some thinking, one somewhat important part that goes on into all this testing is the test matchers. If you scroll up to all the way to the beginning of this file, you'll see there's an import ton community /test-utils without any actual imports. It just imports that package test-utils. And this actually registers a jest matcher. Well, also it registers a Mocha matcher too, but since we're using jest by default in Blueprint templates, then the jest matcher gets registered. And that's why you have this helper expect dot to have transaction.
I actually liked it so much. Yeah, this one is so nice.
Yeah, and well, I think it's quite powerful. I mean, to my knowledge, at least, when we were discussing it in a private working group, we tried to see most of the use cases, and one thing about it is that actually it accepts a bunch of fields pretty much. Well, not all, but most of the fields that you would generally want to see in your transaction. And if just equality is not enough for you, you can actually pass in a function that does your matching for you. So if you want to, check that the operation, the first 4 bytes of your message, of your transaction is some specific number, then you can pass in a function that would grab those 32 bits and compare them to whatever you want. Well, because the operation field is not there, but I think I'll add it at some point because it's quite useful. But still, I think it does allow for some flexibility.
Okay.
Can you explain line 55? Can you explain what's happening on line? What are we checking exactly on line 55 of this file?
55.
Oh yeah, this specific line just checks that in the list of transactions that happened when you send a deploy message, that actually a deploy happened. If you see it wants there to be a transaction with deploy true, well, deploy isn't the real field of a transaction on blockchain, but it just gets translated, if you will, by the matcher. So if there's like a state in it and the state changes from inactive or non-existent to active, then that means that there was a deploy, and it checks that there was a deploy. So when you send a deploy message, the contract must appear, and so it checks that there is a transaction from the treasury to the address of the counter, and that the counter was successfully deployed, that it actually appeared on the blockchain in that map of contracts.
Okay, thank you.
Nice. It's actually it's a very kind of powerful tool, and so pretty much everything is very intuitive. And Max, do you have any kind of like input on how important it is to test contracts? Because I still meet some guys that are actually writing some fancy code and then just deploy it to the chain and then test it. Because maybe, of course, like we those who program for quite some time, we know that testing is sometimes 50-60% of the contract writing. But maybe you could put your input on that as well.
Sure, of course. Well, when you're dealing with smart contracts, testing is 100, 1000 times more important than when you're writing just regular code, because you're dealing with money this time. And when dealing with money, you have to be extra careful. And of course, you could say that, I'm writing ideal code, and you might even be right that, you're not making mistakes. But sure, you might have reviewed your contract code right now, but then maybe, your employer or you yourself want to add some new functionality, you add a few lines of code, and suddenly your code becomes unsafe without you knowing it. And that's why it's important to write tests. And, if you've been in the crypto sphere, in the cryptocurrency sphere for some time, then you know that there have been some quite huge hacks in the recent times. Like, it's not uncommon to hear about certain crypto protocols to be hacked for a few $1 million, and that's not really even that much, because there have been hacks for hundreds of millions. Well, I mean, in TON, I don't know if we currently have protocols with that kind of total locked value, but I mean, I'm pretty sure we will have at some point, even if we don't have them now. And so testing your contracts is very important. You have to make sure that, no one can break your contract to steal money, to lock others' money in forever, and that sort of things. So it's just so your users even can trust you. So if you're making some public kind of decentralized application and it doesn't have tests, then your users can't easily verify your code too. Like, they would have to be reading pure fancy, or, well, at least now we have TACT, but still that's just source code. At least if you have some tests, you can show that you at least tested some basic behavior, and that your code can at least be somewhat trusted. And also, tests just can help to understand your code better, because in tests you just you can just define the behavior that you want your contract to have.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting part that sometimes I also seen, and I've done it myself, to be honest. Sometimes I'm writing some contract and I'm using tests part just as a kind of documentation for the future, because like if someone is looking into the test suite, it's actually this person is seeing like the flow that you like, the perfect flow that you expect to be. But could you say a bit more about the like edge cases, like how important it is to actually to like what to test, so to say? Maybe you have some input on that.
Well, actually, one good source of inspirations, there was like a TON hack challenge, and it's in the TON docs, I believe. There's conclusions from it, a blog post written by a good developer as well. I think you should read that to understand a few things about, some of the vulnerabilities, some of the common vulnerabilities in contracts written in fancy. But of course, that's not all. And yeah, of course, when you're writing tests, you usually begin with the expected flow of things, like when everything goes like you expect. But of course, it's important to test everything that can happen. Like, for example, what if if you have, like, for example, something simple like a bank contract or something else where you can just deposit and withdraw money. What happens if someone sends the wrong messages with wrong operation codes? What if someone sends in an empty message? What if someone sends a message when they don't have the privileges required for that? What if a bounced message arrives? That's actually quite an important one too, because at least in the TON hack challenge, there was, I think, something related to bounce messages.
Actually, bounce messages is something that a lot of people ignore.
Yeah, there's like a simple snippet of code that allows you to outright just ignore them, and in most cases, that's what you should be doing. But yeah, you have to at least try to find all the edge cases that can happen, all the paths that your code can take. And it's especially important with systems of contracts where you have 2, 3, 4 or more contracts. You have to understand how the messages will flow through them. You have to make sure that you don't have infinite loops between them, because that could drain your contracts, and all that kind of stuff. Could be helpful to draw graphs of messages that could flow through your contracts. So basically, just test as many edge cases as you can identify, and preferably give your code to someone else to review, to someone that has experience with writing smart contracts too, because a new set of eyes is always helpful, and this can prevent some bugs too.
Okay. Yeah, this is maybe I didn't quite understand the part about when you said that there's some best practices, and from the hack challenge you said, right? There was. So do they have like a list of scenarios?
Well, it's not really best practices. It's just, there was a hack challenge, and there's just conclusions drawn from it. So it just states how every challenge was defeated, and that's just, common stuff.
Is it the one from Don Volkov who?
Yeah.
This is an awesome article. If you can you find it now, or?
Yes, I found it actually.
Yeah,
I can show you the screen, or I can give you the link.
You could just drop a link into chat, and but it's just interesting. Like this is like maybe more on the security part, but I'm very curious about what maybe we should come up with some list of things that any new developer should test, like maybe a list of scenarios, like if you have a single contract, let's say the question could be, what is there any case when your contract
Your connection is dropping. I can hear you.
what is the test scenario?
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, now yes. But I missed your question entirely. Your connection is dropping.
Okay, now good. 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
2, 3. Sorry guys, I'm just in the hotel, so I'm on travels now. But yeah, so basically the thing was, maybe we could come up with a list of, like a checklist of things that the new developers could actually go over, because I used to say now that in order to learn how to test properly a contract, just go to GitHub repositories and look into other tests, right? But it's one of the ways, but maybe you could actually drop some cool repositories where to look good tests. But second, maybe we could come up with a list of kind of checklist of questions that would bring people closer to how to write better tests. Like, for example, is there any scenario that can run your contract out of money, and how to test it,
Well, I'm not sure if I'm ready to give any sort of checklists right now, because that kind of stuff requires preparation, maybe a few tips. But yeah, I dropped the link in chat for the drawing conclusions from TON&Co challenge by Dan Volkov. If you're planning to write contracts, you should read it. And also there was another article I also gave a link to everyone, by Certic. Certic is like a crypto security firm, smart contract security. They're doing reviews on many big crypto projects, and they've also written some tips for smart contract security on TON. And that's actually much closer to a checklist. There's a few things that are actionable, or at least guidelines, and that's also quite a good read. As for the tests, the repos with good tests, there's open source GetGems contracts I can drop link to. They all have tests, but I think the tests are using the older TON contract executor, but maybe they have updated, maybe not. But still, regardless, it should be quite good. 1 second, I'm looking at this. Yeah, I found this. Here's another link. That's one of the repos that I know that has a lot of contracts, and all of them are tested. Maybe you can take that as inspiration for yourself. But yeah, for checklists, I don't know. As for draining your contracts, one thing to be careful with is when using accept message. There's a standard library function in Fancy.
For the external message. For the external ones, right?
Yes, mainly for the external ones, but not just the external ones. So it sets the gas limit to the maximum. Basically, it just buys as much gas as is required for processing your message. But when you're invoking it with the external message, you have to be sure that this external message comes from the intended sender, and that it does not harm you economically, and that it cannot just be spammed over and over. For example, the wallets, when they accept external messages, they check the signature of the sender, the signature that comes with the message, and verify that it matches the public key that they have stored, to ensure that it was actually the owner who sent it. And they also check the sequence number that is included with the message, to ensure that the message cannot be spammed over and over. Because when you're invoking accept message while receiving an external message, you are paying for its processing, and you're not just paying from this moment, you're also paying for whatever code just ran before, the storage fees, the import fees, and all that good stuff. So you have to be careful with using accept message with external messages.
Okay, that's interesting. And maybe I will share a little bit of my screen to actually go through some links that you've shared to show the guys how exactly to use them. Maybe, yeah, I actually use this Get Gems repository as an inspiration for a lot of things regarding NFTs. The guys really did a good job combining those. So wait, not source. Yeah, spec. So guys, basically, so you have the list of contracts, different contracts like NFT auction, like collection, or like few versions for each of them. This is like SBT iTeam. So as we were talking on the other stream, you would have the same collection contract code, but you could just change the wallet code from the regular to SBT, and this would be SBT kind of token. And yeah, so you basically open the folder, and then you find this spec file. So spec file is something that you would actually want to, you could just read through these titles, and this would already give you the idea. But actually, these guys are still on contract executor.
Yeah.
Maybe we should create a footstep for rewriting this whole folder into the Sandbox.
Well, maybe, yeah, but you know,
anyways,
works with executor too.
Sorry?
It works with executor too. It mainly just tests the behavior of a single contract.
Okay. Yeah. So, but yeah, I hope you guys get the idea that Max is telling us. And let me open another one. This from Certic. Yeah. So basically, we don't get these recommendations from guys just for the fancy code, because yes, you have in fancy code, but like you have to do some decisions in your fancy code. But important thing is that you need to test it, and this is something that a lot of devs. So Raphael, can I ask you something? Did you already write some tests for your contracts that you're doing?
Not yet. Planning to, but not yet.
Sorry?
I'm planning to start writing tests, but I'm first continuing. I'm coding the first version of the contract, then I will test it.
Okay. Because this is exactly what you want to do when you hear from someone that there's potential threat. And here you see tip number 1. Wait, I didn't see this tip. This is such a great tip, actually. That's what I will preach this one a lot, that you guys should always draw the message flow diagrams. Nothing to do with tests, but this one is a good one. I somehow missed it in the flow. But anyways, yeah, for the rest of them, you should actually kind of, when you see some tip, try to understand what kind of test you can write on your contract that would actually catch this tip from happening. And by the way, regarding bouncing messages, Max, what kind of utilities you have in Sandbox for that? Can we simulate the bounced message? Is it possible?
Well, if a contract bounces, then the transaction will be returned to you that it bounced. There's like a field on transactions that shows if it was bounced or not, and it's set to true in the case of bounced messages. And you can test them in the exact same way as you would test any other kind of message. Because, bounced messages are exactly that. They're just like all other messages, just with a special flag and the body made up by the blockchain, but still they're regular internal messages in that regard.
Yeah, but maybe I should come up, like on another stream, I will maybe come up with some example, because it like you have to send such a message that will be actually bounced back. So like if you want to test the bounce process, you know.
Oh yeah, but yeah.
I think I will come up with more examples, and maybe Max, if you um, if you don't mind, we might just this might be just the first stream out of multiple. So if you ever want to get some feedback from guys, maybe we could use this kind of intermediary if you like it.
Sure. Yeah, that could work.
Yeah, maybe for the next one, I will prepare a number of examples that we could maybe talk about together. So, and this would be more practical one. But anyways, thank you very much for explaining some of the basic principles behind the sandbox, how it emulates it, and for answering our questions, man. Thank you so much. And I hope you guys. Oh, maybe last question, and then we kind of wrap up. What are the plans? What do you plan to implement in Sandbox? What are the new cool stuff?
Well, as I said, Tact is coming, but that's not related to Sandbox. That's related to Blueprint. Tact is going to happen at some point, for sure. And well, generally, I think most of the features are done, but there's just some, little things that can be done in both Sandbox and Blueprint. Some things could be made more convenient. For example, right now in Blueprint, you have to whenever you run a script in Blueprint, you have to choose the deployer, well, TON&Co, TON&Co, deep link deployer, or mnemonic deployer. You have to choose the contract that you have, the script that you want to run, the network that you want to use. And so it gets tedious if you know that you're always, using testnet or always mainnet and always TONKeeper or, stuff like that. Then you can just, we have in plans to have a config where you can set all those values, and it will automatically choose all of this stuff for you every time, and you don't have to press enter 3 or 4 times whenever you run a script. That's just quality of life. For Sandbox, there's also some things planned, well, not as big. We plan to add the ability to set the current timestamp. Right now you would have to override the blockchain class to be able to set timestamps in
You mean like if you want to go front in time, right? Like if you want
forward or backward in time? Yes. Right now you would have to override a method in a blockchain class, but we're planning to add that so you can just use the default method. Yeah. And there's also another feature, but I'm not going to be telling you what it is right now because I'm not sure if we're going to be even making it or not, but it could make things more more useful, more convenient to use. But it has to do with like basically the way the chain gets processed. Right now you don't really have control over it, and if a message creates 3 other messages and all of them extend the chain by 3 messages more, then you don't really have control over it. You just have to, your code just sits there and waits while all of them get processed. But there might be a feature that could help you get more fine-grained control if you need it. But yeah, I don't know. It's still in very early planning right now.
And do you plan to do any testing for the TON storage? Like, for example, because TON storage is also related with contracts, right? So
Yeah.
when the contract is made between like the uploader and the provider, we could also test some things there. Do you think it makes sense to get into this?
Well, maybe I haven't really thought about it. And also, TON storage is not just contracts. Yes, contracts is one part of it, and yeah, maybe they can be tested, but it's also the program that runs on the provider's computers and on your computer too. But I mean, well, we can test that, but that's not really Sandbox's job. It's just, you're right, regular unit tests for that program. But yeah, contracts maybe, but I haven't thought about it yet.
Yeah, sorry. I just got a phone call.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think because when I'm presenting TON for developers in many places, I always say that one of the coolest part is that it's like a network, and a lot of parts of the network are actually run by contracts. And we might want to, if you want more developers to actually join, like because there's very small amount of devs tweaking around the TON storage part, because everything has to be tested there on chain. So you just do it, and then you would expect it to work. But anyways, you don't write any custom contracts there. It would rather be, because it's all like built in. All right. So I'm not going to go into this direction to make it more complicated. But again, one more time, thank you very much, Max, for spending this time with us. And I hope to see you soon at some point.
Sure. So also thank you for this opportunity to talk with the users. Yeah, I hope that we get together soon at some point too, and maybe I'll hear some feedback, maybe some interesting proposals about what could be done.
All right, great. Then guys, have a good evening, and see you all soon. Bye bye.